For the Florida Chamber of Commerce, I am Preston Scott, and joining me from the University of West Florida is Rick Harper. Rick has served as Senior Policy Advisor on Economic Affairs to the Florida Senate, and probably more importantly than that, just a good friend of the Florida Chamber of Commerce. Rick, good to have you with me. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, Preston. Thanks for having me on the show today.
My pleasure. You know, the governor has spent an inordinate amount of time in his first few years in office working on international trade. You just served on a panel at Northwest Florida's Trade and Logistics Plan rollout by the Florida Chamber Foundation, and it deals with international trade and trying to position the state and every part of the state for international trade. What are some of the most important insights that people need to know around the state about that?
Well, I think insight number one is that it makes sense to focus on trade, and that's for economic reasons. It's good for business, and the reason for that is that international trade, has grown more rapidly than other parts of the economy for the last generation. So if you look at consumer spending, business investment spending, government spending, and then our transactions with the rest of the world as being the major categories of economic activity, trade has grown at sometimes as fast as double the growth rate of the rest of the economy. So it makes a lot of sense for the governor and others to be focused on the role of trade, because you want to hitch yourself to the fast-moving sectors, and trade is where it's at.
So what are some thoughts that you would have, Rick, for preparing for that?
The compelling rationale for expanding trade is that it makes sense for businesses with the cost of transportation falling, so that now you can ship from Florida to major destinations via containerized transport, so that the goods stay safe and secure, locked up at the factory gate, and then not unlocked again. We all remember Marlon Brando on the waterfront and how goods would disappear. It used to be said that you couldn't ship Scotch whiskey or Swiss watches internationally because they would tend to disappear on the docks of Hoboken, New Jersey, and containerization has really revolutionized the way that businesses go about shipping to their foreign customers. It's estimated that over the course of containerization, which has been in place now really since the late 1960s, but has exploded in recent years, it's dramatically lowered the cost of shipping, so that in some cases the cost of international shipping is not appreciably more than the cost of shipping from one domestic destination to the other. So it makes sense from that perspective, and also for businesses, given increased communication abilities. The world is now the global village. It's just as easy to send your computer-assisted design drawings and schematics to your factory elsewhere as it is to send them around the corner. And so all of those things mean that the cost of shipping, the cost of managing overseas operations, whether you're a buyer of imports, a seller of exports, it's just gotten dramatically easier. And Florida, of course, is very well positioned to take advantage of that because we have so many of the assets which are critical for growing international trade.
Yeah, let's tick off maybe a couple more of those, Rick. The Florida Chamber Foundation, the latest study, cleverly titled Florida Made for Trade. What are some of those assets? What are some of the reasons that positions Florida so well against other competition?
Back in economics graduate school, we used to talk about the critical assets as being land, labor, capital, both physical and financial, and then entrepreneurial ability. The Chamber classifies those sorts of things according to the 6 pillars nomenclature, which is an extremely useful way to think about what it takes to be successful in business. But Florida's really got a lot of the assets. We are, surprisingly enough, not as fully developed in international trade as some of the other states in the union, but we have tremendous cultural linkages, tremendous possibilities for expansion because of the way that particularly Central and South Florida relate to Latin America, which traditionally has been a great growth market. Now, of course, in recent years, particularly 2013 forecast for 2014 and beyond, Latin American growth has slowed. It's not the market that it was, say, 5 to 10 years ago, but it's a great market, and there is no one better positioned than Florida in terms of the human skills, in terms of the physical infrastructure, including deep water ports, access to markets via highways, railroads, and then the cultural linkages that it takes to establish those business relationships. So we're very well positioned, particularly for Latin America, but also for other markets.
Let's talk about the connection between international trade and just economic development in general. The governor obviously focused in his first few years in office, hoping to have some more, but the bottom line is he wants to develop Florida's economy regardless of what's going on around us nationally. What can Florida do? Okay, so connect the dots between international trade and economic development within our borders.
Well, as you look at markets that Florida can participate in, there's certainly the U.S. Domestic market. We are such an important destination for tourism from around the U.S., North America, and around the globe. But if you want to diversify your business cycle risk and have important sectors that are tied to the health of economies that are not dependent on whether Washington, D.C. is able to pass a budget or reduce the debt, then trade is a good thing. Why not tie yourselves into growth sectors throughout the world? An important example of that is here in Northwest Florida. As you look at the Airbus A320 manufacturing facility that's going into Mobile, Alabama, that the trade that gets generated from that, the demand for wide-bodied commercial jet aircraft over the next generation is huge. And as the folks in Southeast Asia particularly that sell us things, as families ascend into middle-class status and start taking flights on aircraft, then there's going to be a huge demand. There is a huge demand. And in fact, the most rapidly growing airline markets are in Asia because that's where the population is. That's where the growth is currently. And so Northwest Florida is going to get to participate in the growth in Asia in an important way, and it's going to be the revenue generated by families in India, families in China, buying airline tickets that's then going to flow back through the supply chain, and as they pay for those A320 aircraft that are going to be filling up the skies of Asia, that's going to be creating jobs for workers in Northwest Florida, just a short hop away from the final manufacturing assembly point in Mobile. Northwest Florida workers are going to be employed making the components, the bits and pieces that go into those commercial aircraft that will be sold around the world. And so that creates the win-win dynamic that is so important with trade, that as families in China and India sell their labor to sell products to us that make things that we buy at that blouse down at TJ Maxx is now cheaper for your spouse to buy because of the availability of textile imports and what we then do with our revenue that where we earn paychecks. We buy those products, and then we take the paychecks of Chinese and Indian families and put them to work employing Northwest Florida workers. So trade is a win-win situation. It's a voluntary exchange between willing participants across national borders, and that's why it makes so much sense.
Lastly, I'm going to give you almost an impossible Herculean task. You mentioned the 6 pillars a few minutes ago, Rick. How would you describe to people that might not be intimately involved with the significance of the 6 pillars? First, real quickly describe the 6 and the importance of them.
Well, I think it's a smart way for the Florida Chamber to characterize the business environment in the state of Florida. You've got to have key assets, talent supply and education, pillar number 1, really for any state economy. But the Florida legislature rightly concentrated on raising per pupil spending this year in the 2014 session, and there's a huge emphasis on industry certifications, getting our workers the right skills that they need. That's because talent supply and education is I would say, arguably the most important of the 6 pillars, but also you have to look for things such as our economic development policy. Do we do a good job creating an environment ripe for innovation? How can we arrange the state's regulatory climate, our business climate, so that we can be competitive in the battle to attract capital assets, the factories, the service-providing companies who will provide good jobs for those well-trained workers. So if you look across the 6 pillars, talent supply, innovation, we've got to provide the infrastructure, the ports, the railroads, the miles of center lane miles of the highway system to get people here, and we've got to combine that with the right sorts of governance systems. We've got to have a great quality of life so that this is a place where high-skill workers want to make their home, and it's got to be a place where businesses know that they can find the assets they need to be successful. So I think the 6 Pillars framework is a great shorthand for how to describe the way all those factors fit together, and congratulations to the Chamber for developing it and pushing it hard.
Rick Harper with the University of West Florida, my guest. I'm Preston Scott, reminding you that if you'd like more information on the 6 pillars, go to flchamber.com.